UFC 305, Du Plessis versus Adesanya. Kind of the nightmare scenarios of the entire card, the worst case scenarios of the entire card. And you might be thinking, oh, looking at the main event, Adesanya, Du Plessis, what's the worst case scenario in this fight? Of course, the worst case scenario could be a 2-second broken toe. I mean, we're not going to go that far and say worst case scenario, but as you guys know, if you watch the channel, I'm not a fan of Adesanya. I don't like his personality. I don't really like the way he fights, always on the back foot. He's always countering and things like that. I fight like that sometimes, but I'm on the back foot for like 5-10 seconds, and then I come back and go back on the front foot. Adesanya is on the back foot his entire fight, and the only thing I could really say that I like about Adesanya would have to be the activity level that he had as a UFC champion of the middleweight division. He wasn't fighting once a year, twice a year like some people. He was going 3, 4, 5 times a year, which I really, really loved about Adesanya. But this is where you might be thinking, oh, I'm not a fan of Adesanya. I must want him to lose, right? No. The worst case scenario in this main event is a Du Plessis win. And I'll be honest with you. I didn't want to say it. I don't want Du Plessis to lose this fight, but Du Plessis winning is not a great scenario for the UFC middleweight division, as if we're looking at the rankings, he kind of already beat everyone. I mean, Sean Strickland, he would have already beaten Israel Adesanya if he wins this weekend, and Robert Whittaker. Guys, what if Robert Whittaker beats Khamzat Chimaev? Are we going to do an Imavov versus Allen title fight? Probably. And then what happens after that? He wins that one, and then there's nobody. There is literally nobody in like the top 10 that's an up-and-comer on a good win streak that could deserve that shot. Now you could say Kyle Borralho could deserve that shot, but again, let's say Kyle loses to Jared Cannonier. There's the options kind of dwindle away because Dricus has already cleared that top 3, and those top 3 are starting to clear the next wave of fighters in the middleweight division. So I'll be honest with you. I actually hope, I'm betting on Dricus Du Plessis this weekend. I got some pretty good plus money on him. But for the sake of the UFC middleweight division, for the sake of like who's going to get the next shot, are we really going to get super excited about a Nasruddin Imavov title fight? Probably not. Probably not, if we're being honest with you. Are we going to get excited for a Brendan Allen title fight? Some people will. Some people will for sure. But the grand scheme of casual fans and everything like that, not going to be excited for that. So I know 100% the UFC is praying that Israel Adesanya goes out there and gets the win. Because guess what that does? If Adesanya loses, where does he go? He's already fought Whittaker, Adesanya, Strickland, Imavov, and these guys are trying to get title fights. Nothing really would entice Adesanya other than, obviously, a title fight. That's all he's been doing is title fight, title fight, title fight. You might be saying, oh, he can move up to light heavyweight, fight Yuri. What if he loses that one? I really do believe Adesanya retires if he loses this weekend, which, again, kind of ruins it for the middleweight division because Du Plessis, again, would have not that many challengers to keep on facing in the middleweight division. And I do believe Adesanya winning is on the UFC's best interest because if he goes out there and beats Dricus Du Plessis, what do we have? We look at the UFC rankings, we would have a Sean Strickland rematch. Sean beat Israel Adesanya dominantly. Adesanya just beat Dricus, and then they have that grudge match rematch in the middleweight division, Sean versus Adesanya. Then maybe Whittaker beats Chimaev, and Whittaker has finally earned his shot, and he can fight Adesanya. Or Chimaev beats Robert Whittaker. Chimaev versus Adesanya. So many big fights to be made in the UFC middleweight division that aren't going to be there as much and aren't going to be as big of a storyline as if Du Plessis would win. So on the UFC's interest, they want Adesanya to win 100%. Because again, Adesanya might retire should he lose this week. And let's go down the list a little bit. Co-main event, Steve Erceg, Kai Kara France. There's not really a nightmare scenario here or a worst case scenario, as if we're looking at the flyweight division, it's number 4 versus number 7. It just kind of puts someone there in the UFC flyweight division. I believe either way, the UFC would be fine booking a Kai Kara France Pantoja fight or booking an Erceg Pantoja fight. Both fights would do similar numbers in terms of pay-per-views and things like that. So I'll be honest, not really a bad case scenario. Whoever wins there, I'm sure the UFC would be perfectly fine with that. Now, lightweight. Lightweight, Gamrot versus Dan Hooker. Ladies and gentlemen, you already know what I'm going to say here. The worst case scenario is Gamrot wins. And I like Gamrot. He's the BMF. He's taking fights. He doesn't have to. He deserves a shot inside of that top 5. He should be fighting Oliveira. He should be fighting Gaethje. He should be fighting Arman Tsarukyan. But the UFC is not booking these fights. So, what I am proposing is, well, he loses. That would be the better case scenario here, because if he wins, we're going to have to do a Gamrot versus Arman Tsarukyan fight, which I actually personally like. I'll be straight up with you. Me, as a hardcore MMA fan, I am frothing at the mouth about and thinking about a matchup with Arman and Gamrot, the rematch from their first 5-round main event many years ago. Arman and Gamrot for the interim title really, oh, it really hypes me up, man. For the casuals, probably not. Probably not. I mean, the casuals are just going to say, why don't we give Oliveira the rematch? Because there's just so many Charles Oliveira fans out there that believe after a loss, you should be given a title shot. Adesanya, we're talking about you. But ladies and gentlemen, that'd be not a horrible, oh, that's such a bad case scenario for the UFC. But it wouldn't be a great case scenario because, of course, it would put Arman Tsarukyan, who doesn't have a crazy amount of fans that are going to buy the pay-per-views and things like that. Gamrot the same way. He doesn't have a crazy fan base. UFC probably hopes Gamrot loses. And we do, Dan Hooker gets inside of the top 5. You can start doing Dan Hooker, Justin Gaethje. Holy shnikes. That's a crazy matchup. And you can do Oliveira versus Arman Tsarukyan. That's the best case scenario there. That is the best case scenario, but it doesn't happen if Gamrot goes out there and gets the win. So, personally, I'm predicting Gamrot to win, but I actually do believe, in terms of the casual fans, in terms of buying pay-per-views and things like that, the better case scenario for the whole of the lightweight division is going to be Gamrot losing. So, the UFC, even though it's not going to be right, Oliveira shouldn't be fighting for the title after losing his last fight. But that's better for the UFC. Oliveira, Arman Tsarukyan for the interim title, UFC 310, UFC 308. I don't know when they're going to do it, but maybe UFC 308. And then, of course, Dan Hooker, Justin Gaethje, 2025 5-round fight night main event. Tell me that doesn't hype you up. I mean, both case scenarios for me, again, as a casual or as a hardcore, sorry about that, do get me very excited. Arman versus Gamrot, very, very good. Oliveira versus Arman Tsarukyan rematch. I mean, I'm not as excited for it, to be honest with you, because I don't believe Oliveira would deserve it, but I'd still like it. I'd still watch the fight. I'd still enjoy the fight, and it'd be better for the casuals. And we would still get that Dan Hooker, Justin Gaethje matchup, which I think would make a lot of sense ranking-wise should Dan Hooker get the win. So that would be the best case scenario and worst case scenario there. I'm sure the UFC is praying that Dan Hooker catches Gamrot coming in with a big knee. For heavyweight, Jairzinho versus Tai, I don't necessarily think there's a worst case scenario here, because I mean, it's heavyweight. I mean, they're kind of like the middle of the pack guys, number 10, number 12 in the UFC middleweight division. If Tai wins, okay. I mean, you could do Tai versus, he's already fought kind of everyone here, so what really can you do? Tai versus Lewis rematch or something? I don't know. If Jairzinho wins, it's kind of the same case scenario. So either way, there's not much of a downfall. There's not much of an upside for either man winning. So there really is no worst case scenario there in the middleweight division. Carlos Prates, Jingliang Li. This one's clear. This one's a clear worst case scenario for the UFC is Li Jingliang wins. The reason the UFC does these matchups with up and coming undefeated in the UFC guy, 2 knockouts in a row, breezing past the competition, and they finally give him a veteran, the UFC never wants that veteran to win. I've never ever would expect to hear Dana White come out and say, yeah, we really wanted Jingliang Li to take out our prospect, Carlos Prates. No, ladies and gentlemen, the UFC wants Carlos to go out there and KO Li Jingliang. So the worst case scenario here for this one in the welterweight division is, first, maybe Carlos Prates wins, but it's a boring fight. It's a kickboxing match, a point match, a karate type match, where they're landing jabs and they're kind of being hesitant and not throwing. That'd be a bad case scenario. Even if Prates wins, really slows down his hype. So the best case scenario, of course, for the UFC, Prates KOs Jingliang in round number 1. And then the worst case scenario is Jingliang KOs Carlos Prates in round number 1. Again, this is another one the UFC 100% is going to be looking at Carlos Prates to win, because they're, I'm sure of it, are probably going to do another Brazil card in 2025 and are going to 100% want Carlos Prates as the co-main event on the main card, and to build his name as a 3-0 undefeated in the UFC guy with KO power. So yeah, worst case scenario there is for the veteran to win. As for a lot of these veteran versus newcomer matchups, that's kind of always going to be the worst case scenario, the veteran winning. Junior Tafa, Valter, Walker. Low-level heavyweight MMA, I highly doubt the UFC really cares that much on who wins there. I guess, yeah, worst case scenario, Valter beats Junior Tafa because the crowd wouldn't like it. But yeah, again, I doubt the UFC cares too much there. And for all of these fights, again, UFC is not going to care too much either way. These are lower level ones. I mean, Jack's coming off a loss. Tom is 1-1 in the UFC. These are both veterans. I guess worst case scenario here would be Nicoll losing in the first fight of the night. That wouldn't be good. But yeah, other than that, I really do believe there's not that many bad case scenarios for the UFC. It's really about the main card, like most UFC fight cards. In Gamrot winning would be a bad case scenario for the UFC, in my opinion. Du Plessis winning, I actually believe to not be a good case scenario. And then Jingliang Li winning, I don't think the UFC wants that at all. So those are the worst case scenarios for UFC 305, and I'm sure that's kind of what the UFC is thinking. I'd be surprised if the UFC wants Du Plessis to win. I'd be surprised if the UFC wants Gamrot to go out there and grind Dan Hooker and win a unanimous decision. And I'd be surprised if Jingliang Li, if the UFC wanted him to go out there and get the win. So those are my kind of worst case scenarios for the UFC and for myself. Again, personally, I want Du Plessis to win. That would just cause him to become a more and more dominant champion to clear out the middleweight division. I'd be perfectly fine with that, to be honest with you. But again, it would cause Adesanya to have no options. It'd cause him to probably retire, in my opinion. So I don't think that'd be a great scenario for the UFC. We wouldn't get any more Adesanya fights. And again, Du Plessis would be left with not a crazy amount of options. So those are my thoughts. Make sure to like and subscribe. Do all that cool stuff. I'll be very happy if you check that pinned comment out on in the comments section, you know, for all the bets this weekend. But thank you guys for watching. We'll see you in the UFC 307 full card prediction.